Good evening and welcome to Chasing the Facts. I'm your host, Sam Chase, and with us for this show is Erin Drew. And Erin is one of three candidates running for the Select Board in this year's election. Just to remind viewers, the townwide election this year will be held on April 5th. And if you are unsure as to your precinct, because the precinct lines have been redrawn, and your voting location, please call the town clerk's office, or you can go up on the town website, access the town clerk's webpage, and you can find out what your precinct is, where you're going to vote, and things of that nature. So we have plenty of time to do that, and I also understand that the last day for registering to vote, if you are not now registered, is March 16th. So we just want to get the information out there. So Erin, what we do with our guests, we ask for a very short bio, and then we get into the discussion. So I'll turn it over to you.
So first off, thank you for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome.
My name is Erin Drew. I'm originally from Central Massachusetts. I went to Worcester State College. I have a BA in business, or BS in business. I spent several years overseas after college. I worked for a variety of companies, startups, Fortune 500s. I have a U.S. Customs broker license issued by the Department of Homeland Security. My career up until last year was in trade compliance and logistics. My husband Chris and I live in Chelmsford with our three kids.
I hope so, because you'd have a hard time running for office if you didn't.
Yeah, probably wouldn't make it.
No, I don't think so.
We have three little girls. We have a 6-year-old and 4-year-old twins. So, you know, they've kept us active in town. I'm a member of the Chelmsford Mothers Club. I'm a member of the Neshoba Valley Mothers of Multiples. I've done a bunch of events with them, and I've gotten to know a lot of people in town. Also, I've been a member of the Zoning Board of Appeals for the past a little over 3 years now. So that's kind of what brought me here to this point, I think.
Well, it's good. I mean, I think having the experience on a major town board, and I would consider the ZBA a major town board, is a pretty good foray into elective office. Yeah. We've chosen to do that. So having said that, I'm going to, since you are a new candidate for the board, I'm going to ask you, why is it that you've decided to run for the Select Board at this time?
Yeah, so I've been on the ZBA for a few years. You know, I've been learning and I've been watching what goes on in town. I've learned a lot about some of the issues that are facing Chelmsford. I think that development is huge, is a big overall up-and-coming thing in Chelmsford. But also I've looked around at the other boards and committees in town while the time I've been on the ZBA, and I've noticed kind of a lack of representation for younger families in town. So I wanted to kind of lean in a little bit and maybe get a little bit more involved in some other things, and I see a need for maybe my perspective there on the board. And
well, I think that's a very valid reason for wanting to run, because after all, it's a 5-person board, and the board is elected at large from the general voting population, and the idea is that you do represent the citizenry of Chelmsford. Unlike a place like Lowell, for example, that has, well, they have a hybrid actually, but they have district representation. Yeah. You don't do that in town. So you represent, if you get on that board, you are representing every single voter. Yeah. And sometimes that's a hard thing to remember, but you know.
It's a lot of voters.
Yeah, it is. I think it's 26 or 27,000 registered voters in town, which is absolutely amazing, you know, when you think about it. It's an awful lot of people. Unfortunately, when you get a local election, which is what this one is, we're not going to have any state or federal offices on the ballot, our turnout has been very poor the last 10 or so years. Years ago, 15, 20 years ago, you could typically expect a 19 or 20% turnout, which is dismal. But in the last few years, it's been down to, I don't know, 12, 13%. Yeah. So hopefully we can do something to get that up. So, okay, well that's good. Now, should you get on the board, obviously you're going to have to function as a member of the town's top executive board. So do you have any thoughts about, as you said, you've been watching for 3 years now, how the board manages their role relative to how the town manager manages his role, relative to how town meeting participates? So I guess I would ask you, how do you perceive those various roles that each of those entities has, and how they interact, or how you feel they should interact? That's kind of a complicated question, but I think you can probably answer.
It is. Well, and I it's come up in conversation. I know there's some things in front of the board over the last couple of years that have prompted this conversation, I think, amongst themselves. So my understanding is that the select board is in the big umbrella. You know, they do the policy of the town. They kind of try to implement the vision of the master plan for the town. And basically they're policy making. They're the board of directors that would be the board of directors in a company. I kind of see the town manager as administrative, management. You know, he is the CEO. His job is to implement that policy and manage it and manage everyone underneath him. And then a town meeting I see as the vote, you know. So the board kind of presents things to town meeting as the representatives of the community say yes or no. And then I see the town manager's role basically to implement the things that are voted in. So.
Well, I think your answer was probably shorter than my question, but I think you answered it very, very well.
I mean, it might be a little more nuanced than that. Obviously, then you need you need communication between the town manager and the board, I think is important, but that's
Everything is more nuanced, but we only have a half an hour,
Yes,
so
yeah.
we can't get that nuanced. But I think, you know, you certainly appear to understand the relationship, and you've pretty much mirrored the structure as it's laid out in the town charter. Sometimes the roles get a little blurred, and then we can get into trouble that way. But I've always agreed that the best analogies are select board equals board of directors, town manager equals CEO, and town meeting equals legislature.
Oh, thank you. Good.
Yeah, because
So
that's pretty much that's pretty much the way it's structured. So, relative to again, and we'll rely on your 3 years of experience sitting on the ZBA. Have you had, let me just ask you, have you had a 40B project before the ZBA during your tenure?
We haven't. We did just continue an intended project on River Neck Road that has been caught up in, I don't know if anyone's aware of it, it's been caught up in ownership legislation for years, but I think there will be 40Bs there. Things have come across us, not for approval necessarily, I think, but I haven't had any major involvement with 40B projects.
So
I did follow the North Chelmsford, the old UMass campus project pretty closely. I attended the special town meeting last month.
Any thoughts on that particular project?
You know, I said this in my last interview with Tom, I found it interesting that it was so overwhelmingly voted for. I personally thought it was a good project also. I thought that it was going to go through, and it did. And you know, I think it's good. I think the spot is good. I think it's good to hit that 10% threshold for the 40B. I think that gives us a lot of flexibility going forward as a town to manage how we want to look at how we want to manage development. It gives us more flexibility. I thought it was interesting that the housing superintendent mentioned he'd like to see 2 units of 54, and you know, I was thinking exactly the same thing. I was wondering if anybody was pushing for that. So, but overall, that's pretty much how I expected that to go, and I think that gives us some good leeway as far as 40B goes in the future.
That was one of the few situations where I saw almost complete unanimity of purpose among the various constituents that were trying to get that thing through. You had good cooperation between the select board, the planning board, the town manager, the town planning director. And I, like you, I mean, I thought it would pass, but I was quite surprised at the margin. It was, I forget what the percentage was, but it was way over 80%.
Which is wonderful, though,
Oh, it's
because it
terrific.
shows that it has community support.
Exactly.
And, it's wonderful
yeah.
to be able to pass something like that
Right.
and not. I mean, I've been on the ZBA for 3 years, and sometimes it's hard to pass things without public support. Or to not pass things
Right.
because they're lacking it. So to see something go through like that with such a great show of support is
Exactly,
is
but
wonderful.
it was very well coordinated among the departments, and I've been in town now for 43 years, and I have never ever seen a situation where the potential developer invested so much time and effort to try to accommodate the concerns of the town, and especially the abutters. If you had said to me 5 years ago, hey, Chase, we're going to have this large housing project, and a majority of the abutters are going to be for it,
Yeah.
I'd say, well, you're smoking something.
Yes, yeah.
It's never going to happen. But it happened in this particular case, and I know I spoke with the developer and found him to be extremely knowledgeable because they've done a number of these, but that's their MO. So I agree with you. I think that was a very, very. I think it's good for the town, but I also thought it was good for the various groups in town. The way everything was done in,
Yeah, the collaboration
in a
and-
collaborative manner.
Yep.
Yes, and I hope we can see more of that going forward. Not to say that everything should be rubber stamped. I don't agree with that either. But I mean, there's no reason for some of the rancor that we get in some of our conversations. So, so having said that as a lead-in, generally, relying on your 3 years of observation, how do you feel that the town administration, and when I say town administration, we're talking now the CEO aspect of it, the town manager, his staff, the people under him, the people that actually run the town, how would you rate their performance? Do you have an opinion on that? Do you see a need for any kind of change? Or?
So financially, as a town, I think we're in good shape. I think their performance financially has been good. From an administrative function perspective, I think perhaps we're lacking slightly. I do think there's a little bit of a lag. I do think, to your point you mentioned earlier, sometimes the lines get blurred between the different functions, between the select board and the town manager and town meeting, what their jobs are. So, sometimes I think the select board gets a little bit into the minutia. And I think it's important for us to keep in mind that their job is policy, the big picture, the big umbrella. And town meeting is legislative, to your point, and the town manager is administrative. His job is to implement the policy. Sometimes I think we get into a little bit of minutia, and it's important for us going forward to kind of manage our perspectives of what everyone's roles are here in town. So I think there's a little bit of minutia. There are some things that I think we need to get done so that we can come back and focus on our policies and our big picture goals as a town. And sometimes I think the select board needs to refocus a little bit to get back into that big picture mindset.
Okay, I think that's a fair observation. You did mention the budgetary aspect, which of course I think you would agree that is probably the primary focus of the town administration, is the annual budget, which now exceeds $150 million a year. I'm not even going to tell you what it was when I was on the select board, even adjusting for inflation.
People would be mad.
Oh yeah. Well, it's like the gasoline prices, you know. I
Yes,
mean,
yeah.
what are you going to do, right? I mean, that's you've got events that are occurring that are beyond anybody's individual control, and you just have to do the best you can with that. But obviously, the cost of everything is increasing, both from an inflationary standpoint and just from a cost perspective. And the budget goes up every year. The law says that we can increase the tax levy by a maximum of 2.5% from the prior year, plus any new growth that comes on board. Okay, so typically your tax increases more than 2.5 because you might have anywhere from $1 million to $2 million worth of new growth, plus any debt that is incurred, as a result of what they call excluded debt. You can add that to the picture. And we have contracts in town. They all have escalators in them. People's salaries go up. The cost of goods and services go up. So it's a situation where we have to address those escalations. But then we run into property taxes, which I have yet to meet anyone who enjoys paying a property tax bill. Nobody likes that, right? So people's taxes go up every year.
Especially these days, with the real estate market doing what it's doing.
So I'm going to ask you, how do we balance? You're on the select board now, and so you're messaging to folks, and you're hearing from people who are upset about their property tax bills and other things. How do you put that all into context for the average resident, so that they understand they're not going to like the answer regardless, because the answer is everything goes up every year, right? But how do we communicate the message that you're getting a good value for your dollar when you live in Chelmsford? And as somebody who's looked at other towns and their cost structures, I think we get a good value for our buck in Chelmsford. So do you have any thoughts on any of that?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think we do get a good value. I think our 1.8 is not a high tax rate either for the state. It's about average. Compared to a couple of our neighbors, we're a little bit higher, but as far as statewide, we're about average. We do get a good value. We have trash pickup, we have services that other towns don't have. And I think that's important to keep in mind also. So having said that, I do consider myself fiscally conservative. I think that there's money to be found in other places also that can try to kind of help keep those tax rates level or down. So that's something that I intend to dig into a little bit more in the budget. But again, that might be out of my purview. So I don't know how much I can say to that. But
I don't think it's out of your purview to look at the budget and have a conversation.
Well, and I think there are other ways that we can bring money into the budget also. So, and one of the things that I'm hearing in my conversations with people is about our lack of state representation. I think that we could use a little bit more reach across the aisle with our state reps. A little more state funding maybe could be possible. Chapter 70 is on my radar. I've had that conversation with several people and have yet to get a really clear answer on why we get such a low percentage of Chapter 70 funding compared to some of the surrounding towns. So that's something that I feel like I want to dig into a little bit. I'd get on the phone and,
Well, I can give you the names of 3 or 4 people in town who I would consider are experts on that subject, and they can certainly educate you very quickly, I think, as to what the problems are, and it goes back 30 years.
Yeah, I've heard a little bit about how the formula is calculated, so that's something that. But there's other things too. There's money out there that I think we could be making more of an effort to kind of get into town here. So and maybe hopefully offset some of the other things in the budget so we can keep those taxes where they should be.
Yes, and I think you made a very good point. If you take a look at the statistics for the 12 or so towns that surround Chelmsford, you're right, we're about in the middle as far as where our property tax burden is. And that is actually in even a few towns that have a very high tax split. For example, the town of Bedford is classified at 175. Littleton, I believe, is at 151, Tewksbury is at 153, and our tax split is currently at 120. And so for the benefit of those who are listening, what that means is if you have a tax shift of 120, it means that a commercial property owner will pay 20% more property tax than he would otherwise under a unified rate. Okay, that's what that means. And then that amount is then put back on the residential tax rate. So it's about a 5-to-1 ratio right now. So if we do a 20% split, for every $5, for every dollar I save as a resident, the commercial property owner whose value is the same as mine is going to pay $5 more. So it's about a 5-to-1 split. So do you have any thoughts on that? That's a policy that we've been using now for about 4 years in town. Before then, we didn't have the split rate. We had the unified rate. So, and you're going to be asked that question in the CBA debate, I guarantee you.
I have been asked it. I have been asked it many times
Yes.
already, just in the campaign trail. So, yeah. So the split rate. I said this to Tom last week too. The split rate. I think the original split was ambitious. I think that the board has done a good job of walking it back a little bit over the last couple of years, and I think going forward, where that goes is going to depend on the budget overall. It's going to depend on where real estate values go. I think it's going to depend on a lot of things. But generally speaking, I see the draw, but I think that it has a much larger impact on the small businesses in town. And small business, we define it right as 10 employees or less.
Yes.
But if you have 11 employees, you don't get that exemption. There's no exemptions. There's no. So I think it has a big effect on our small businesses, and I think that's a problem. I think it has an effect on our town's competitiveness for businesses coming into town. We want to draw businesses into town, right? So that split rate is disincentivizing for them. So, I think that's a consideration also.
So you get a chance to look at that every year if you're on the select board, because one of the things that the select board is exclusively responsible for is making the determination, do we have a single rate or do we have a split rate? And if we're going to have a split, what is the degree of split? And state law says that you can do a maximum of 175, although in Chelmsford we can't do that because of the demographic. We're only allowed to go up to a 150 shift in Chelmsford. I think that would be a very drastic move if we ever did that. And so you would look at it every year, and I like your answer. You would look at things like the real estate value appreciation, residential versus commercial, and that relationship. And I think if you go back and do the study into the legislative history of why that was implemented, I think you'll find that was actually the reason why the legislature implemented, give the tax shift law to give communities a method to manage the ratio of contribution to the tax levy commercial, to keep it relatively constant irrespective of the shifting values. So. And it kind of looks to me like, and I've talked to some members of the board recently about this, and it looks like that may be the direction that the board is going to go in. If they do look at these tax shifts going forward, they will make that their primary consideration, trying to manage that levy share.
Yeah, there's a lot of things to consider. And
yeah.
I mean, I think the average residential taxpayer in Chelmsford, if the real estate market goes down next year, everybody's taxes are going to go down regardless of the rate, right? If the rate doesn't change, but the real estate properties go down, everybody's taxes are going to go down.
That's true.
Their assessments will go down, right? So, and I think that the average residential property owner in town doesn't really care why their taxes go down.
Yeah.
I don't think they're going to be angry about their taxes going down because of a drop. Well, I mean, nobody wants their real estate to drop in value, but if their taxes go down overall, then I think that puts less pressure on the split rate conversation.
Oh, of course.
So, yeah.
Well, I can tell you as an assessor for 12 years, I have never gotten a phone call from anybody that says, hey, Chase, why did my tax bill go down? It's never happened.
No, don't ask questions.
And if it ever did, I think I don't know what I would say. Well, I'd obviously be able to explain it, but it would be very humorous if that ever happened. So that's good. That's a very, very important thing that the Select Board does. The other area that the Select Board has exclusive jurisdiction is in licensing, okay? And you have to take a look at that situation every year. You approve all of the licenses that the town grants, alcohol and
Car dealerships,
common
I
vic
understand.
and car dealerships and stuff like that. So, and that can take a lot of time if you do your due diligence correctly. So, but anyway, do you see, just looking out now prospectively, what would you identify as the town's top priorities, both short-term and long-term going forward?
I think development. I think development is huge. I think that Chelmsford is at a critical time in its
Would you say that that's a hot button?
I would say that that's a hot button, yeah, for the average. I don't think it's a hot button in our town government necessarily, because it's a big, it's a big conversation. But I think it's a hot button in town among the people who
Among the
live in
residents.
town. Yes,
yeah.
absolutely. There's projects going on everywhere. Some are favorable, some are not. But I think development overall is going to be the big issue. Now, how all these other, a lot of factors trickle down into development, right? So, things like competitiveness of our businesses. So the split tax rate, I feel like, trickles down into that, right? Because if we're not competitive and we can't get businesses to come into town, how do we develop the 129 corridor, right? There's a lot of different factors that trickle down into the development conversation, many of which we've talked about. Another factor, for example, the town manager's contract. I would like to get the town manager's contract settled. I think that would be something that's kind of a low-hanging fruit, if you will. That's something that I feel like has been going on for a couple of years. Another hot topic. And I think we should resolve it one way or the other and move on so that we can get back, again, kind of regroup and get back to the big picture
Going
thinking,
back to what you originally said when we first started
yes,
talking.
get back to the role of the select board and the role of the town manager and the role of, and get things done, things that are important. So
Yep.
I think those would kind of be my two big.
And of course, we've already talked about taxes, which is always
Yeah.
a hot button.
Yeah.
As far as you're a parent in town, so do you have any thoughts on how we relate, how the town administration relates to the school system, the kind of relationship we have there?
Well, from what I understand, we don't have a lot of oversight. The school committee really rules
Right.
the school.
But the relationship, I think, that the select board has to the school department and the school committee specifically is quite important from a perceptual standpoint, in terms of, we're all rowing in the same direction.
Yeah.
kind of.
Well, I understand from the town charter that the select board does meet with the school committee prior to the budgetary conversations of the every year.
Yes.
Which I found interesting, because prior to that, I really thought that there was less interaction. So that was an interesting read for me. It gave me a little bit.
And I'm very pleased that you've actually read the charter.
Yes, yeah, I've read
And I
through the
wish more
charter
people
first.
would do that.
More so, and I had read it some time ago, but I read through it a couple of times in the last couple of weeks
That's
again.
good,
So
and you will read through it many more times, I'm sure. And even after, should you be elected, you'll find yourself referring to that
Yeah.
because it's very instructive. So, Erin, we've got just about a minute left. The half hour goes very quickly, so I'm going to give you about a minute to look into the camera, as we say, and ask for the vote.
here, right? This is the camera.
Well, you can look at me. That's fine. I know that's not an easy thing to do, but you can look at me. Jack's telling you to look at the camera, so go ahead.
So yeah, I mean, the last day to register is March 17th, March 16th, you
16th,
said?
yeah.
I hope that some people who aren't already registered will get out there and register. I'd love to see more community involvement. I'd love to see more people running for office in town, more people getting on these appointed committees. And I hope that on April 5th, you'll come out and offer me one of your 2 votes. 2 votes.
That's good. So, do you have a website? How can people reach?
I have a Facebook page,
Okay.
Erin Drew for Select Board. It's public. You can find it.
Okay, so folks, just Google it,
Google
Erin Drew for Select Board, and you'll get something.